Twilight Sparkle woke to the jangling of her alarm clock and shut it off with a sleepy flail of her hoof. It had been another long, though rewarding, night of study, and though she was still short on sleep, Fluttershy was expecting her early. A soft snore emanated from the basket at the foot of her bed, where Little Dragon lay sleeping. Twilight shook her head with a fond smile. She never had to worry about Spike getting enough rest. She reset the alarm clock and left a list of chores next to it for her assistant. Still yawning, she brushed her teeth and combed her mane, then put on her saddlebags and packed up the books the previous night's study had turned up. Birds of Equestria and The Illustrated Guide to Exotic Creatures. Fluttershy had found an egg she didn't recognize, and was up to Twilight to determine what it might hatch into. So, despite the early hour, she grabbed a day-old muffin from the kitchen and headed for the door. She stepped outside and breathed in the cool morning air. It was shaping up to be a beautiful spring day, and this time Twilight would be outside to enjoy it instead of wrapped up in her reading. She yawned again and chuckled to herself as she trotted down the road towards Fluttershy's cottage on the outskirts of Ponyville. She'd known she had to wake up early today, and she should have gone to bed much earlier, but in her search for illustrated eggs, she had stumbled upon a fascinating book titled On the Theory of Alternate Realities, which she wound up reading until the small hours. The author described some interesting ideas about the nature of reality, but of course the whole study was entirely theoretical, and given the subject matter, she laughed to herself, it was likely to stay that way. She was well outside of Ponyville, almost to Fluttershy's cottage, when she heard it. There was a noise, like an enormous sheet of canvas ripping down the middle, and right before her unbelieving eyes, a jagged scar opened in the world. She only got a glimpse of a strange forest, and were those monkeys? Before a huge creature filled the tear, barreled through and crashed into a nearby bush. The hole in the world closed quickly behind it. There was a moment of silence, and then birdsong in the distance began again. There had been nothing dramatic, no bright lights or loud noises, just a small burst of magic and the thing. Twilight took a hesitant step towards the bush, then jumped back again as the creature rose to its full height, disentangling itself. Twilight stared at it. She'd seen a lot of strange creatures during her adventures, a hydra and cockatrice among them, but this thing took the cake. She had first thought it wasn't much bigger than a stallion, but as it stood up, she realized it was huge, almost twice her height. It towered over her, balancing on its hind legs like an angry bear, while its short forelimbs dangled by its sides. The forelimbs didn't end in hooves, but in hands that were only roughly similar to Spike's. Where his short digits were scaled and clawed, this thing's hands were huge and spidery. And she realized with a shiver that it had an extra finger on each hand. They were covered only in bare pinkish-white flesh, with no claws at all. "It's the same color as a peach," a small corner of her mind noted irrelevantly. One of its hands held a long stick, almost as tall as the creature was, carved with dozens of strange symbols, like writing. The rest of the thing was covered in a long black coat made of some heavy, shiny material she had never seen before. Only its head was uncovered, and she got a better look at that as it turned around. Its head was tall and domed like a pony's, but its short, scruffy mane barely covered the top and back, leaving its neck bare. The face had all the right features, but they were weirdly placed and shaped. The ears were round and set low on the sides of its head. The mouth was small, and it wasn't a muzzle, leaving the nose to rise like a lone mountain surrounded by plains. The eyes were intense and too small, although they widened as it saw her. Apparently, she had surprised it as much as it had surprised her. Hitting the bush only hurt a little. Getting out hurt significantly more. The branches were tipped in these little thorns that scraped my hands and head. At least my leather duster, spelled to stop bullets and claws, prevented any thorns from sticking me anywhere it covered. It was a bit like wearing body armor to a Nerf fight. But then again, I thought, looking at my scraped hands, there's no such thing as overkill. Now, I wondered, what fresh hell is this? I scanned the surrounding countryside with rapidly mounting disbelief. The whole place looked too perfect to be real. A gently rolling meadow stretched out as far as I could see, dotted with occasional beautiful trees. In another direction, I could see a series of hills covered in hundreds of apple trees, and the road I was standing on stretched to a distant little village that looked adorably quaint. This place wasn't a fairy tale land. Believe me, most fairy tales, like most fairies, are actually dark and bloody in the original versions. A word this idyllic could only come from one place. How the hell did I end up in a Disney movie? I thought. I heard a small sound behind me, and when I turned around, I got an even bigger shock. Behind me stood a small purple unicorn, staring at me. Now, I can say with a minimum of lying that I am a very manly man. I don't drink light beer. I eat steak without worrying about cholesterol. I don't ask for directions, and sometimes I beat my chest to display my dominance over lesser males. But I swear, to all the powers that be, that unicorn was the cutest thing I had ever seen in my life. Underneath the shock of seeing it, I wanted to giggle like a 5-year-old girl and pick it up in a big hug. I don't care if that sounds weird. It was that freaking adorable. It was only the size of a large dog, but it had a rounder head than any horse I'd ever seen, and its eyes were a pair of large, expressive orbs. Above the eyes was a little spiral horn, the same purple as the rest of its coat. Its dark purple mane was styled like hair, complete with bangs and a few streaks of pink. On its hip was a mark or tattoo that depicted a cloud of sparkles around a dark purple, 6-pointed star. It stared at me in what looked like a state of shock, but it didn't bolt like a wild animal would. I suppose people didn't regularly tear apart the fabric of time and space to fall out of thin air around here. I stared back and made the mistake of meeting its eyes. The large orbs of soft purple watched me in a combination of curiosity and fear, and as I looked into them, I felt the unmistakable beginnings of a soul gaze. You have got to be kidding me, I thought, even as the magic began. The eyes are often called the windows of the soul, the truest reflections of a person's heart. As poetic and uselessly romantic as that may sound, for wizards, it's true. If a wizard and anyone else hold eye contact, they can peer through those windows to see the other's most fundamental nature. Normally, I was more careful. Not only is it wrong to see someone like that without their consent, but they get to see my soul too. I'm not much for introspection, but from people's reactions, seeing my soul is not a pleasant experience. One woman even fainted. I hadn't been careful here, because there is one very important requirement both people need for a soul gaze to occur. Something I'd never thought a pony, unicorn or not, lovable or not, would have. Namely, a soul. I was in a library. Saying it was huge is about as accurate as calling the sun big. It stretched further than I could see in all directions, and I mean all. The staircase I stood on looked endless, counting floors stretching both and above me. Books were everywhere, not just on the shelves, but stacked on reading tables and left in chairs. One had even found its way onto the stairs. I stepped off the staircase, walking deeper into the library. The ceiling was painted to look like a section of the night sky, with constellations fancifully illustrated in luminous outlines. The room's light came from large chandeliers shaped like 6-pointed stars, each surrounded by a cluster of individual lamps in holders of the same shape. It took me a moment, but I realized they matched the mark on her flank. I wondered about the importance of the symbol, but the rest of the library distracted me. As I walked among the shelves, I noticed that despite the scattered nature of all the books, they were lovingly maintained, with hardly a cracked spine or dog-eared page to be seen. Her collection of wisdom may have been disorganized, but it was obvious that none of it was neglected. The whole place was a temple to a love of learning and respect for knowledge, but it held more as well. On the ends of the bookcases in the walls hung picture after picture of other creatures. There were posed portraits and photos that seemed taken on the spur of the moment, childish crayon drawings and gorgeous oil paintings, bas-reliefs, and even some small sculptures, all arranged as haphazardly as the books. I saw the same 9 or 10 creatures repeated again and again, clearly important people in her life. Strangely, they weren't all unicorns. They were all built along the same lines, but apparently the horn was optional. Some had wings instead, and others had neither. The more childish drawings centered around a pair of figures that I took for her parents, and a purple and green blob. A pet, maybe. The more recent images, though, revolved almost entirely around 7 individuals. The first one that caught my eye was a butter-yellow Pegasus with a soft pink mane and tail, her shy smile gentle and warm. I thought the purple unicorn was cute, but this one was weapons-grade adorable. There was another unicorn, this one with a pure white coat and a deep purple mane and tail, obviously styled. She looked like a real beauty queen, but her smile had an open, friendly quality that hinted at a much kinder, deeper personality than most socialites. Granted, most of the socialites I'd met recently were vampires, crime bosses, or fairies. Nosy wizards with money problems don't get invited to many normal parties. Pictures of a bright pink pony were hung in the oddest places, making it seem like she was popping up from everywhere. She wore an enthusiastic, almost overjoyed expression that matched the bubbly antics she seemed to be engaged in. I don't think there was a single picture of her sitting still. Another ordinary pony, Orange, was never seen without a Stetson and hard-nosed expression that reminded me of my mentor, Wizard McCoy. She was almost always depicted working on a farm, roping cattle and doing other cowgirl, cow-pony activities. I stopped dead in front of a picture of a little purple dragon belching green fire. A dragon? An actual, factual, fire-breathing dragon? But he was tiny, even smaller than the ponies. He was purple with rounded green spines lining his back. I realized this was the purple blob from those early pictures. He'd been with her for a long time. He was always shown helping out, at least when he wasn't sleeping. Whatever he was to her, he definitely wasn't a pet. The last of her apparent friends was another Pegasus, mostly depicted sleeping or flying, with a particularly cocky look in her eyes. She was blue, with a rainbow-striped mane and tail that seemed out of place, even among the psychedelic ponies. Whoever they were, it was obvious that these particular ponies were very important to her. She must have loved them all deeply for them to hold this kind of significance in her soul. The places of honor, though, were reserved for a huge, winged unicorn. She was proportioned more like the horses that I was used to, long-legged, with a graceful neck and a long muzzle. Her coat was pure white, but her mane and tail were striped pastel pink, green, and blue, and were always depicted blowing in the wind. From her crown and her regal bearing, I guess this was royalty of some kind, but also something much more to the unicorn. The soul gaze ended suddenly, and I was back in the sunny meadow, staring at the little unicorn. She had fainted dead away. "Great," I muttered. "I've been here 2 minutes and already managed to traumatize one of the local population, a sentient unicorn, no less, into unconsciousness." I sighed and bent down to haul the poor girl over my shoulder. As I did, I felt a sharp tingle like static electricity, the sign of a fellow mage. Oh, of course she knows magic too. Nothing about this situation was weird enough already. Well, I couldn't just leave her lying in the middle of the road. I eyed the town in the distance warily, unsure how they would react to a stranger carrying in one of their own unconscious. I checked the opposite direction and noticed a small cottage not too far away. It looked both welcoming and familiar. I started towards it, hurrying a little. "Hope they're friendly," I said to no one in particular. I was almost to it when I realized why it felt so familiar. The quaint little cottage looked like it had come straight from the Shire. Quick recap then, for the folks at home. I'm carrying a tiny, purple, sentient unicorn mage that I accidentally knocked out into a hobbit hole looking for someone to help her. Could it get any weirder? I groused as I opened the door and stooped in. "Oh, Twilight, you're here," the small, yellow Pegasus from the Soul Gaze said happily as she turned around. Her face quickly changed to shock as she saw me. Well, of course they could talk. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Fluttershy was having a busy morning. She had fed all of her little animal friends early. Now, she was busy making a fruit salad for her and Twilight to share after they were done identifying the eggs she had found. Her back was to the door when she heard it open. "Oh, Twilight, you're here," she said happily, turning around. Then she saw it. It was huge, taller than even the manticore she had once tamed. Its head nearly brushed the ceiling as it rose from stooping through the door. Its long black coat fell open as it straightened, and Fluttershy could see it holding Twilight, unmoving in its arms. She was on the verge of full panic when it spoke. "Okay, this really isn't what it looks like. I found her on the path to your house, and I brought her here to get help." It spoke softly, but quickly, in a deep voice. "I know I look very scary, but I promise I'm not a bad guy." Fluttershy barely noticed it was speaking. It had knocked out Twilight, and now it had come for her and her animals. She knew she had to defend them, but it was so scary. She glanced up at it, and it stared down at her, its tiny eyes more intense than any other creature she'd ever seen. Her heart clutched in her chest, her wings locked to her sides, and she started to hyperventilate. The creature looked away quickly and lowered Twilight to the floor, then turned to crouch over her. Fluttershy shut her eyes and whimpered slightly. "Dormius, dorme, dormius," a soft voice whispered. Fluttershy slumped over, her mind going blissfully blank. The last thought she had before she slipped fully into a dreamless sleep was how sad the voice had sounded. Fluttershy woke up in her bed. "Oh, goodness," she thought. "What a strange dream." Then she noticed that Twilight was asleep beside her, tossing and turning with a troubled expression. "Wait, she didn't stay the night. So did that really happen?" Her question was answered by the sound of off-key singing coming from downstairs. It was a cheerful song, but the lyrics didn't make much sense. "What's a yellow submarine?" Fluttershy wondered. "And why would any pony live in one?" The song grew louder, and was accompanied by the squeaking of stairs as the creature climbed them. Fluttershy squeaked and pulled her covers all the way up to her eyes. It came into the room, its hands full with a tea tray on which her teapot, 3 cups, and a sliced apple sat. It bumped its head on the low ceiling and muttered darkly, eyeing the offending architecture. Then, noticing she was awake, it stopped muttering and gave her a smile that looked more tired than happy. "Sorry about scaring you, but I honestly don't mean any harm. I made some tea. I didn't know what kind you like, so I had to guess. I hope the cinnamon spice one is okay." It set the tray down to one side of the bed and sat down across it from her. Now that it wasn't towering over her, Fluttershy thought, it really wasn't that scary. "I mean, you already had teacups, so I brought them even though I have no idea how you hold them, given that you only have hooves." Fluttershy mumbled. "Thank you." It smiled at that, this time with more warmth, and began pouring tea into 2 of the cups. She took a cup in both hooves, which seemed to baffle it, and sipped slowly. "It's nice to see that you can really talk. For a while there, I thought I just imagined it," it said, munching on an apple slice and holding the tea in its other hand. These are good. "So, anyway, I'm Harry." Fluttershy had a moment of confusion. "Well, you see, not to be rude or anything, but you're not." "I'm not what?" "Harry. I mean, I know plenty of animals, and you're actually one of the least hairiest things I've ever seen." A frown crossed his face, and she blushed a little. "Not that I'm calling you a liar or anything, I just, well..." She trailed off into silence. It rubbed its forehead with one hand and sighed a little. "Don't worry about it, it's just a name. How about you just call me Dresden instead?" "Oh, okay. You can call me Fluttershy," she said, giving him a shy smile. Do you mind if I ask you something?" It put down the tea and nodded. "Is it what I am and where I'm from?" She bobbed her head. "Well, I'm what we call a human, and I'm from another world. I got here on accident. Do you not have humans here at all?" "No, I've never even heard of humans before. You're in Equestria. We have ponies, dragons, cows, buffalo, griffins, and lots of other creatures, but no humans." "A world where ponies evolved from men?" it said, chuckling. Fluttershy just looked at it in confusion. It smiled again and extended a hand towards her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Fluttershy." She gave a small smile and shook it. "Likewise, Mr. Dresden."